I'm going to introduce our first presenter, who is Claire O'Brien. And the title of her presentation is Study, Identification, and Publication of a Roman Female Portrait in the Joslyn Art Museum.
Before I get started, I would be using lots of terms that I won't have time to define, so if you can refer to the handout throughout, things might be more clear. Okay. Located in the vaults of the Joslyn Art Museum is an unidentified female Roman portrait head. Looking at her, several questions arise. Who was she? When did she live? Why was this portrait created? I've spent the summer attempting to answer these questions. In preparation for such a task, I traveled to museums across the world in search of similar portraits while researching Roman and particularly Severan portraiture.
If you put the arrow down at the very bottom, there's a right arrow. Oh, sorry. Just turn around.
Okay. All right. In order to identify the portrait, I first needed an intimate knowledge of it. It was carved from white marble and stands 8 3/4 inches tall from the top of the head to the chin. Her full, oval face is tilted downright and her uncertain gaze stretches into the distance. Her expression is of nervous contemplation, one only stressed by the size of the eyes. As seen in the slide, she has unnaturally large eyes framed by overly arched brows. The arched brows, indicative of concern, curiously leave the forehead uncreased. This is anatomically impossible. Her nose seems small and unobtrusive under the sizable eyes and brow. Her thin mouth stretches just past the flare of the nostrils and smirks slightly. The mouth is dwarfed by the presence of a bulbous chin, which captivates the viewer's focus. The age of the portrait is rather ambiguous. She lacks age-indicative features such as crow's feet and wrinkles, but her fleshy face seems to sag and has little elasticity. As seen in the slide, her eyes appear to have bags underneath them. Her frisure, or hairstyle, seems to be more matronly than youthful. The combination of these features creates a curious union of young and old. The portrait's nest frisure is indicative of the Severan era. In a nest frisure, the hair is pulled together in the center back of the head into a chignon created by piling braids onto one another. As a result, there is an incised oval of concentric braids on the back of the head, resembling a nest. This frisure is in fact a wig, as can be seen by the presence of side locks. The size of the Joslyn's portrait's side locks is unparalleled. The large S-shaped locks escaping from underneath the wig occupy the majority of the cheeks. To my knowledge, there is not another Severan portrait with side locks this size. The arrangement of hair, style of frisure, and size of features are all indicators of the Severan dynasty. The Severan dynasty began with the rule of Emperor Septimius Severus in 193 CE and lasted until the fall of Alexander Severus in 235. In this short period of time, several empresses came and fell in quick succession, some merely lasting months. Some empresses have no securely identified portraits because there simply was not time to produce them all in favor. Moreover, some of the imperial ladies' memories were damned, meaning that new portraits were prohibited from being made and existing ones were destroyed. These two factors contribute to the mystery shrouding female Severan portraiture. In order to identify the subject, I compiled a catalog of portraits with similar grids. I then studied the arrangement of hair and features in comparison to the Joslyn. Once I had several promising ones, I traced the profile line as well as the profile line of the Joslyn and compared them, as seen in this slide. In antiquity, when a portrait type or version was mass-produced, its features may have varied, but the profile remained uniform throughout. This has been confirmed by the study of extensive surviving portraiture of Augustus. Once the profiles were traced, I used Photoshop to adjust sizes and angles in order to most accurately match the lines. I did this for similar portraits as well as ones of Severan empresses. Certain discrepancies may be overlooked if the profile lines matched. If the lines did not, then they represented different subjects or types. It is important to note that I was only able to use this method with portraits having intact profile lines. This eliminated several potential matches. I will now walk you through the comparison of a portrait. Perhaps one of the closest matches I found was the possible Plautilla in Naples. Plautilla was the first wife of Emperor Caracalla. They were married only a few years before he banished her, eventually having her killed and memory damned. Looking at the hair in the portraits, several discrepancies can be observed. Although both wear a nez frisure, Plautilla's frisure is longer, and there is clear difference in carving technique. Whereas the Joslyn portrait has fine delineations seemingly marking every strand, Plautilla has deep incised locks periodically throughout the hair. As seen in the slide, Plautilla also has more frequent marceling, or waves created by a hot iron, with at least one more marcel on either side of the part. She has the beginnings of a widow's peak directly below the part, a feature not shared with our portrait. Moreover, the shape of the locks in front forms a gentle oval shape. This contrasts with the Joslyn, which has a dramatic triangular shape with collapsing sides. Plautilla, too, has sizable side locks, but they are neither the shape nor the size of her counterpart, extending only to the lobe of the ear. Notice the more realistic and natural curl compared to the large, flat locks of the Joslyn. Plautilla's side locks seem less stylized. The frisures again contrast when considering the actual nez frisure. The hair surrounding Plautilla's appears to be in more distinguishable rope-like locks. The bottom lock is repeatedly twisted, leaving regular notches throughout. This differs from the Joslyn, which seems merely to have had a nez frisure stuck in the middle of otherwise normal and undisturbed hair. Plautilla's nez frisure is larger, that is, it has 4 concentric ovals as opposed to 2, but it also lacks evidence of braiding and intricate detail. Looking at the faces from straight ahead, there are many dissimilarities as well. Plautilla's is much thinner and younger than the Joslyn. Her eyes are smaller and farther apart. Unlike the Joslyn portrait, her brows meet in the glabellum. Moreover, her mouth is wider and crooked, with a crooked upper lip. These differences are great indeed, but they can be overlooked if the profile lines match. At first glance, the profiles line up rather nicely. The possible Plautilla is one of the few portraits whose chin matches up almost completely with the bulbous chin of the Joslyn. The neck also seems to be a close match. However, beginning at the lips, the possibility of a match falls apart. Note that the philtrum of the Joslyn curves inward, staying close to the face. Now look at Plautilla's. It seems to arch out slightly, creating a larger, less defined upper lip. This right here. The protruding philtrum is attached to a comparably larger nose with a more substantial tip. Plautilla's glabellum is extremely subtle, and the forehead has a gentle, smooth slope, which is hardly noticeable. Now look at the Joslyn's. Her glabellum is far more pronounced, steeply dipping down before continuing on to the rest of the curved forehead. Above the brow, her forehead line straightens out and is eventually covered by the portrait's wig. The Joslyn has exaggeratedly large, inhuman eyes crowned by an equally exaggerated brow. These features are characteristic of the reign of Emperor Elagabalus, ruling from 218 to 222. Therefore, the smaller and more realistic eyes of Plautilla predate the Joslyn portrait. A line on Plautilla's nose indicates it suffered from trauma and is no longer the original. As a result, the nose could have more closely resembled that of the Joslyn when it was created. That being said, the lips and forehead still do not match, meaning these two profiles depict different people, or at least types. After tracing and comparing dozens of portraits in this manner, I still have not found an exact match. Both the frisure and the profile are unique to this portrait. As previously mentioned, I was only able to compare the portrait with existing intact profiles. It is possible that this portrait was one of many, particularly if it was an imperial type. If so, it is likely that it belongs to a new type, as it does not match any existing one. If the subject is imperial, it will be difficult to identify who she is because several of the empresses, particularly the wives of Elagabalus, do not have firmly identified portraits. However, with the research completed over the summer, I can confidently eliminate known portrait types of Julia Domina, Julia Mimea, and Plautilla, as their profiles vary too greatly. The lack of definitive imperial matches also presents the possibility that this portrait depicts a noble woman imitating an imperial lady. This phenomenon is one which continues into modern day, as can be seen in the widespread imitation of Jackie Kennedy in the 1960s. If it is a non-imperial lady, it is almost impossible to discover who she was, as she would likely have far fewer portraits. More progress in identification cannot be made until the discovery of a matching profile. With the addition of another portrait, more research can be done delving into potential imperial connections. Until then, however, we must be content with simply calling the Joslyn portrait an anonymous Southern lady.
Claire, would you entertain any questions?
What did the Joslyn already say that that head was?
For the past 50 years or so, the Joslyn has been working under the assumption that it's Julian a man. However, with my research, the discrepancies between the two profile lines, that's just not feasible anymore.
Question, Claire. What is the range of similar kinds of busts that Joslyn has available that that they're yet trying to identify?
And their balls?
Yeah.
About, would you say about 7 portraits in their balls?
There's a good set that are not.
At least that aren't identified. Yes.
Where else did you travel to look?
Well, I was studying abroad in Sicily. So I went throughout Sicily. I also went to museums in Rome, Venice, Naples, Istanbul, Cairo, and then throughout the United States, such as the Walters in Baltimore.
Do you have future plans or following?
Well, on November 7th, I'll be giving a much more in-depth talk to Joslyn on the subject. And then we hope to publish an article on the head once we have an identification or a more, at least knowing who she is, such as Julian.
And what will happen to the head?
Oh, it will be displayed in Joslyn with new research.